Time to start the new year on a very big note, one so big you're not going to want to miss it. I'm about to show you something in the Bible that you can't afford to miss, and so many people do. So many people read the passage that is Matthew chapter 18 verses 15 through 17 and come away making a grave mistake. What I'm about to share with you, you don't need a PhD in biblical studies or really any sort of formal theological education to understand. All you need is a Bible. Now let's read this passage in question. If your brother or sister sins against you, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church, and if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Now here's the most important part. Now, many people are under the impression that because Jewish people back in those days considered tax collectors to be traitors and regularly did not associate with them, as well as pagans considering them to be unclean and didn't associate with them either, that therefore Jesus means that you should treat people like that, who sin against you and then you show them their fault and they still don't come around. But here's a big glaring flaw with that line of reasoning. Not only does Jesus never endorse that kind of treatment of either tax collectors or pagans, he explicitly denounces it, not only through his words, but his actions. The Roman centurion, who was a pagan, came to Jesus, asked for his servant to be healed. Jesus praised his faith as greater than those in all of Israel. So he healed the pagans. And keep in mind, Roman centurions were essentially oppressors of the Jewish people, or at least they were participating in a system that was oppressing Jewish people. And Jesus healed them. There are many other things that show Jesus' love for Gentiles or pagans. And one of them was again in earlier the Gospel of Matthew. He healed 2 demon-possessed men in the area of the Gadarenes. And given the fact that Jesus cast the demons into pigs, well, it shows that pigs were nearby. It was a Gentile region. He healed them of this possession without any prompting whatsoever. Not only that, but of course the famous passage about Jesus loving your enemies. In the immediate context, it's said to pray for those who persecute you. And the Romans were currently, well, they were persecuting Jewish people. So yes, if somebody is sinning against you, which persecution undoubtedly would qualify as sinning against someone, then you treat them the same way you would treat a pagan, which is, again, to pray for them and to still love even your enemies. Jesus is not saying, when he says treat them like you would a pagan or a tax collector, he's not saying treat them as you disassociate from them, you don't have a meal with them, you throw them away. No. If they don't listen to the church, he wants you to still love them, pray for them. Again, you don't have to participate or approve of what they're doing, but nevertheless, praying for them is still important. To further prove my point, let's go to verse 18 in chapter 18. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done but for them by my Father in heaven. For wherever 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them. For people who are familiar with the Bible, there are many verses that use this exact same language for prayer. Now think about it. It makes perfect sense why Jesus would give this encouragement if his intention is for you to pray for them rather than shun them, don't associate with them. Let's pick up where we left off in verse 21. It says, "Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, 'Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?'" Now, keep in mind, I know that in your English Bibles, it has a header saying the parable of the unmerciful servant, and before verse 15 it says dealing with sin in the church, but those headings are not in the original manuscripts. So this is still part of the same topic, rather than just 2 separate topics completely disconnected from each other. And it becomes even more obvious when, in verse 15, Jesus opens about this subject, about what to do if your brother or sister sins. And then in verse 21, Peter then is prompted to ask a question about how many times he should forgive his brother or sister who sins against him. And of course, it also makes even more sense if you remember that Jesus says to forgive even your enemies. And then Peter prompts Peter to ask, okay, I get what you're saying. How many times do I forgive them then? Because again, Peter would be familiar with Jesus' teaching on how to treat Gentiles and even tax collectors. And one of the most famous parables in the Bible, Jesus says, when Peter asks, how many times should I forgive them? Like 7 times? Jesus says, not 7 times, but 77 times, and different translation says 70 times 70. But either way, the point is still, you continuously forgive. And here's something that you might not have noticed if you read the parable, but it's very relevant to how we treat people in general when they sin against us. Verses 21 to 26. Basically, there was a master, and he was owed 10,000 bags of gold. He was going to basically have his servant have all of his possessions sold so that he could repay the debt. This servant said, "Please be patient with me, I'll pay back everything." He was only asking for a little more time. But the servant's master did him one better. In verse 27, it says, the servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. Now, canceling the debt is way different than, give me time, please be patient, I'll pay it back. No, the master, in this scenario, cancels it. He doesn't have to pay back the 10,000 bags of gold. Of course, as we read later in the parable, this fellow servant, when somebody owed him 100 silver coins, he was not merciful and immediately had his fellow servant thrown in jail. And he warns us with this solemn promise. And says, "Then the master called the servant in. 'You wicked servant, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?' In his anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." So, if you do use this misinterpretation to throw people away, disassociate from them, the Lord will not be happy. And he warns you that that is how God will treat you with the sins that you've committed against him. So, it's a new year. Let's begin anew, especially in the area of forgiveness. If you liked this video, subscribe for more, and give me more comments about what videos you want next. God bless.